Hello, fellow activators. Thank you for tuning in to this presentation on why physical activity is important. We will be discussing the scientific evidence behind how physically active we were made to be, and we'll also talk about the relationship between physical inactivity and chronic disease. Let's begin with looking at what science has shown us from the research on the physical activity of our early human ancestors. As you're all aware, we had a past as a species that involved a fair amount of labor to stay fed, hydrated, and sheltered. But with the rapid addition of technology such as cars, supply chains, and grocery stores, we are now much less physically active than our early human ancestors. But how much less active? Let's take a look at some interesting research from the anthropology literature. In this graph, we are looking at how much energy was expended by our early human ancestors over the last several million years. The blue diamonds represent the resting metabolic rate, or how much energy was needed by the body at rest. The green squares represent the total energy that was expended per day. So the difference between energy at rest and the total expended energy, which is indicated by the orange lines, represents how physically active our ancestors were. So let's take a look at how active we are as a species today. We're on the bottom far right of the screen under modern Homo sapiens. As you can see from the orange line, we are much less physically active than our ancestors were. In fact, these data show that we are 62% less active than our early human ancestors. To put these research findings into a practical perspective, when researchers calculated how active we would need to be per day beyond our average physical activity, they found that we would need to add a 12-mile hike into our daily routines to match our early human counterparts. So we are expending far less energy than our early human ancestors. From the perspective of a healthy body weight, less physical activity would be alright if we just didn't consume as much energy from our foods as our ancestors did. Let's take a look at a study that sheds some light on this topic. From this research study, we see that the caloric intake of our ancestors, as represented by the orange bar on the far left, was around 3,000 calories per day. As you can see from the bar on the far right, we take in only 400 calories less than our ancestors took in per day, which I guarantee you is a fair amount less than one might burn on a 12-mile hike. In summary, on average, we are not as active as we are meant to be, especially for the amount of food we eat. So let's step back and talk about why it matters that we aren't as physically active as our ancestors. It is important to understand that the process of evolution, which is responsible for adapting our bodies to changing environments, is very, very slow. Therefore, we still have similar genetic blueprints as our ancestors. It is important, though, to recognize that genes alone don't determine all of our characteristics. Rather, it's the interaction of our genes and our environment that does. So let's take a look at the interaction of our genes, still designed for high levels of physical activity, and our physical activity environment. When we are active, our genetic code combines with an active environment to provide a human characteristic such as a healthy body weight. However, when we are sedentary, even though we are genetically designed to be active, one too many visits to the couch can lead to chronic disease such as obesity. It is this mismatch between our genetic makeup and our environment that many scientists believe is the origin of most chronic diseases. This concept might help explain why when we are physically active, we tend to live healthier, disease-free lives in general. When we are not active, we tend to be at a higher risk for a host of chronic diseases such as overweight, obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and many other illnesses. Though physical inactivity can contribute to chronic disease, fortunately, the converse is also true. When we become more physically active, we lower our risk for chronic disease. Here are some data showing how effective physical activity can be at lowering the risk of heart disease. In this graph, the green line shows that the more physically active one is, the lower the risk of cardiovascular disease. A similar relationship is shown when the researchers actually measured physical fitness by having participants exercise at a maximum level and then compared the least fit to the most fit. These findings are presented in the orange line. As you can see, this study provides strong evidence that being physically active prevents heart disease. This next study shows a similar effect of exercise on diabetes risk. In this study, researchers looked at the effect of exercise over time on the ability of the body to healthfully regulate blood sugars. Compared to the inactive control group in orange, all of the exercise groups had positive regulation of their blood sugar over time. Other groups who participated in aerobic, resistance, or both aerobic and resistance exercise, the group who participated in both forms of exercise, as represented by the blue line, had the greatest benefit. This study is just one study that shows that exercise plays an important role in preventing type 2 diabetes. In addition to cardiovascular disease and diabetes, research has also shown the importance of physical activity in the prevention of a host of other chronic illnesses, such as obesity and colon cancer, as well as improves the overall quality of one's life and even improves independent living in older adults. With all these benefits, it's no surprise that exercise doesn't just keep you feeling better while you are alive, but also helps one live a longer life. In this study, several thousand men and women were split up into 5 groups by the level of their physical fitness. As you can see, the least active group, Q1, on the far left, had a much higher risk of death than any of the other groups. In other words, being physically fit can ensure you live a longer life. So now you've established that exercise is good for you. Now let's briefly talk about how much exercise is recommended. According to the American College of Sports Medicine, it is recommended that all healthy adults need a minimum of 30 minutes of moderate physical activity 5 days per week, or a minimum of 20 minutes of vigorous physical activity 3 days per week. It is important to understand, though, that these are just minimum suggestions. There is what we call a dose-response relationship between the amount of physical activity and the benefits we gain from it. To understand what we mean by dose-response, let's take a look back at the study on exercise and mortality. From this graph, you can see that in general, the higher the dose of exercise, the lower the risk for death. We also see a similar pattern in the study on heart disease and exercise. The more physically fit one is, the lower the risk for heart disease. So while these studies suggest that the more fit one is, the better, it's important to remember just how much of a benefit there is to becoming even a little bit active. Notice in this graph the rapid decrease in the risk of heart disease when one moves from least fit to just a little bit fit. This shows just how important even a little bit of physical activity can be. In conclusion, there are several important points to take home from this presentation. Number 1, we are meant to be very physically active. Number 2, when we aren't physically active, we are at risk for chronic disease such as heart disease and diabetes. Number 3, the more physically fit we are, the better. However, if you are sedentary, becoming just a little bit more fit has very large benefits. The bottom line is that in order to lead long and healthy lives, we simply need to move. Thanks for tuning in. Please check out our recent blogs and physical activity news at www.activatemobile.com.